what happened with our energy transition, which in many places is known as the Uruguayan energy revolution, because we made dramatic change in a short amount of time. But before entering specifically to describe what we did, first let me try to share with you our point of view. What is the energy problem? What happened in Uruguay, but also what is going on all over the world? Because in fact, the energy problem is not just country by country difficulty; it's an overall problem. So, if I try to begin with this first point, please first allow me to talk you about this. And this is the way the energy consumption but humanity has increased over time. So in the first times, I mean, when we were just the Homo sapiens, it was just using energy just for the metabolism, basic metabolism, just to get food. Then as manhood started to settle down, we began to use energy for other uses, for domestic uses, particularly and agriculture uses. And as the industrial revolution came, we began to use more and more energy, both for domestic uses and for industrial uses. Today, almost half of the energy we use all over the world is just to produce goods. This means that we are not just consuming energy when we are using a car or air conditioning, but when we are buying a new pair of shoes, we are consuming energy because in order to produce this pair of shoes, we use a lot of energy during the whole lifetime of this production. But on top of this increasing amount of per capita use of energy, we have this, and this is the way the world population has increased over time. And if we put these two things together, we get this, which is an incredible increase of the world energy consumption over the last years, particularly. And if we put some figures on that, we see that since the Industrial Revolution, the per capita energy consumption has been increased by a factor of 10, and the world population has been increased by another factor of 10. So the energy consumption for the last couple of centuries was increased by a factor of 100. And the difficulty is that the world energy mix, in fact, the primary mix, is this. This means that more than almost 90% of all the energy we use for all uses, to produce electricity, to run cars, for all kinds of transportation, to heat, for industrial heat, and for everything that we are using energy all over the world, well, almost 90% is coming from non-renewable sources. So a way of phrasing the energy problem is that, in fact, we have to secure energy for an extremely growing demand all over the world. But there's more than that. We cannot talk just about one energy problem, because in fact, we have this. This is the incredible variation of main energy commodities over time. And I'm not showing here the last 3-4 years. I'm just showing the last 4 decades, 3 decades, because this happened all the time, not only with oil, not only with natural gas, not only with coal, also with uranium, where uranium we have an incredible variation over time, with a factor of 15 in a few years. So this happened all the time. So it's very difficult to control the energy for consumers, because the energy commodities are changing dramatically over the time. So what energy ministers used to do in many countries is to put subsidies in order to decrease the impact of this crazy fluctuation on prices. They use subsidies, and subsidies are being more and more important. The last year, according to the International Energy Agency, fossil fuel subsidies were as high as almost $1 trillion just in 1 year. And this is twice South Africa's GDP, just to have an idea. So this crazy variations, fluctuation of energy commodities are having a strong impact on the economy. So in fact, we wouldn't say that it's just one energy problem. In fact, at least we have an energy dilemma, because we not only have to secure energy for a growing demand with almost 90% of non-renewable sources, but we also have to avoid all these incredible economic difficulties caused by different geopolitical instabilities. But this is not the end of the story, because we have this. This is the variation of the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. And yes, for sure, if we are showing the last million years, at least, that we know better, I mean, yes, there have been a lot of changes in the concentration, natural changes in the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. I mean, we have been having climate change over this time because, yes, when we have low concentration of CO2, so less greenhouse gas effect, we are having ice ages. Yes, we have the last ice age was about 11,000, 10,000 years ago. But what is going now, right now, is completely different to what you are seeing in this picture there, because this was the CO2 concentration only a few years ago, a few decades ago. This was the CO2 concentration in 2008, and this is the CO2 concentration today. So this change, this dramatic change, has nothing to do with those natural climate changes that occur in the past. And if we put a zoom on what happened in the last decades or what happened in the last years, what we see is this, in that, in fact, if we're seeing what happened with the CO2 concentration in the Earth atmosphere, we see that the most dramatic changes occurred in the last couple of centuries, and more specifically, in the last decades. And if we compare this with this, we can see what happened. In fact, the origin. I mean, there is in this picture, what we can see is the evolution of mankind greenhouse gas emission due to burning of fossil fuels. First oil, first coal, particularly since 1.5 centuries ago, then oil, and then natural gas. But the point is that we had having a dramatic increase in emissions due to fossil fuel burning. And of course, as there was some doubt all over the world if this was a human or not human origin, the point is that what is going on once again is that more than 80% of the energy we're using worldwide is fossil fuels. I mean, so there are those that when we burn them, we are producing CO2. There were discussion about that, but United Nations reacted very rapidly more than 35 years ago. So in 1988, both together, the World Meteorological Organization and UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, they created what is called the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, where thousands of our best scientists from the 195 countries from the United Nations meet together in order to analyze what are the scientific data, available data, to understand if there's something going on or not. And the conclusions are very clear. Conclusions of all the asset reports they are producing every 4 or 5 years are more and more clear every time. This is the temporal anomaly. This means that the difference with the average temperature, the base load here is the decades from 1950 to 1980. This is the base. And what you see there, when it's more red, you see that there is a temperature which is above normal temperature. And when it is blue, it's below average temperature. So 50 years ago or 40 years ago, we're seeing that something that was, yes, perhaps in the poles, a temporal anomaly more important. But what is going on today, it's completely different. I mean, the temporal anomaly mostly close the poles are more and more dramatic, with almost 4 or even more than 4 degrees of different with the average temperature only half a century ago. But what IPCC is showing us is much more than that, because, for example, 90% of our glaciers are decreasing in volume right now, and some of them are really decreasing in size very rapidly. At the same time, data shows that there are increased number of floods in some regions. In other regions, the droughts are becoming more and more important. In other, there is a strong increase in wildfires, and also in other regions we can have an extreme hurricanes that are making that becoming more and more important. Because in fact, what we can see from data all over the world is that there is a extreme rise in extreme climate events, and this rise is coming not only in intensity of these extreme climate events, but also in the intensity, but also in the frequency of these extreme climate events. And this is causing extraordinarily high economic losses. For some countries, it can be as high as half of GDP of a given year, as happened, for example, with some Caribbean countries some years ago. But it's not only about money. The point is also what happened with living beings. As living beings, as though they are having the most important consequences for this climate change which is going on right now. And of course, the most important of the living beings are human beings. And in the world right now, the most vulnerable people are those that are having less and less opportunities to adapt to rapidly changing things. So migrants, climate migrants are becoming more and more important, and impacts for vulnerable people are becoming more and more important. So in fact, in the fifth assessment report already 10 years ago, IPCC concluded that according to the present data, it is extremely likely with more than 95% of confidence level that human influence has been the dominant cause of the observed warning since the mid-20th century. And in fact, having such a high agreement within science is something which is not that common. I'm a scientist, I'm a particle physicist in my origins, and I can tell you that having the whole science community with backing so strongly those results is something that is not something that we are seeing usefully, commonly in the scientific community. And moreover, IPCC concludes that in recent decades, changes in climate have caused impacts on natural and human systems on all continents and across the oceans. And moreover, the IPCC studies what could happen if we continue doing the same. And the conclusion for the last assessment report says that continued greenhouse gas emissions will provoke further warming and long-lasting changes in all components of the climate system, increasing the occurrence of severe, widespread, and irreversible impacts to people and ecosystems. So in fact, I wouldn't say that we have an energy dilemma. At least we have an energy trilemma, because not only we have to secure energy for a growing demand using non-renewable sources, not only we have to avoid those economic instabilities caused by the geopolitical problems, but you also have to stop climate change. But this is not the end of the story, because in fact, we have this. This is a photomontage of one way of looking at the point that there is an incredibly disbalance on the access of energy all over the world. We can see there a lot of regions that we know, well. Well, there are living millions of people, but this way of, but public lighting, which is a way of looking at with the use of energy, well, public lighting is not the same in different regions of the world. And this is a way of showing that, in fact, according to International Energy Agency figures, about 40% of human beings are suffering some kind of energy shortage. And moreover, which is even worse, that in fact, more than 1 billion people, according to AE, about 1.4 billion people have no access at all to modern energy. In fact, they live like Europeans used to be in the Middle Age. And the most difficult point is that in many countries are, for example, in South Saharan Africa, or in India, for example, about half of the population have to walk hours every day in order to get for wood, in order to get fire, for example, and this is causing a lot of lung problem, and on top of that, the strong difficulty is that in general women are doing this job. So these women can go to school, and this is increasing more and more gender inequality all over the world. So in fact, it's not just having an energy trilemma. At least all over the world, we have what I call an energy quadrilemma, because we have to solve these four problems together. We have to secure energy for a growing demand. We have to avoid those economic instability and geopolitical instabilities that are creating this difficulty for our whole economies. We have to stop climate change, and at the same time, we have to secure energy for all. So this is what we have to face. And then let's try to go to the way we tried to do it in Uruguay, what we call the energy solution for this energy quadrilemma. And if I'm talking about context, let me tell you that when all of this began in Uruguay 15 years ago, in fact, in my country, we're experiencing very, very important difficulties. Because in fact, our economy was growing very, very rapidly those years at as high as 6% of growing per year. And in the energy sector, we're having strong difficulties because, in fact, Uruguay, we have no proven reserve of 9 of the fossil fuels. We have no oil, no natural gas, no coal. We have already used our large rivers to install large hydropower plants, and we have no space to install more hydropower plants. We were not able to import energy from our neighbors. It was easy to do that because our two neighbors, Argentina and Brazil, were experiencing their own difficulties in order to supply their own internal demand. And so we were becoming more and more dependent on imported fossil fuel. And at that time, and in 15 years ago, for example, oil we jumped up to more than $140 per barrel. So we are really experiencing difficulties. We are beginning to have blackouts and energy shortage. And moreover, when we have dry years, in dry years in particularly, when hydropower plants couldn't deliver as much, and we have to import much more energy, even we're importing electricity from our neighbors at extraordinary prices, or we were forced to import more fossil fuels also at very high prices, where we have extremely high cost overruns, which were as high as 2% of our GDP, $2 billion of cost overruns just in 1 year. And this was as the perfect storm. I mean, it was we really needed to do something different. So sometimes crisis bring us opportunity, and this is where we took in our case. And we rapidly realized that the solutions for all of this were renewables energy. Because with renewables, we can solve all the problems of this energy quadrilemma. We were solving all the problems that we had in our country 15 years ago, because renewables are abundant. And of course, if you use them correctly, it's an inexhaustible resource. So we can solve the first difficulty, which is having energy for a growing demand, for a growing country, for a growing economy. It's a domestic resource, so we don't have to import energy at all. There's no fuel to purchase. I mean, we don't have to pay for renewable energies. They're free. So in fact, we are not dependent on this crazy fluctuation of energy commodity. We have a fixed cost of the energy. At the same time, of course, even if you include the whole life cycle, renewables have an extremely low greenhouse gas emission rate. So in fact, you're also impacting positive to climate change. And on top of that, renewables allows us to produce, to generate electricity, in fact, or energy in general, in a distributed way. So you can enlarge the energy frontier, and you can go to regions where it's more difficult to go with other kind of sources. So in fact, we said, okay, so renewables is the best solution. With renewables, we can solve all the energy quadrilemma we have in principle globally, but also difficulties we're having in our country. But of course, we have a difficulty. Difficulty and the challenge was very, very simple to put it in a paper, but very difficult to show to find the solution. The challenges were, first, we have to achieve a power system that runs almost entirely on renewable energy sources. And this was not that simple, because in fact, there were no power system all over the world that was running just with renewable energy, except some particular countries. For example, in our region, in Latin America, Paraguay, where simply 100% of electricity is coming from huge hydropower plants, but this is just very particular to those countries that have extraordinary hydropower resources. But difficulty, the first challenge wasn't, can we really make possible a power system that is running almost entirely on renewable sources? And the other point is, we didn't want to increase cost. In fact, we wanted to decrease cost. So was it possible to create a condition for this strategy to reduce overall cost of our system? And in fact, the end of the story is that yes, we succeeded to do these two things. And let me show you how we. But first of all, I have three more important ingredients that we have to put in place in order for this to happen. First of all, we succeeded to have a long-term policy, which was based on a strong political agreement. This was crucial. I mean, as soon as I went to the office as Secretary of Energy, the first things we did was just try to have together all political parties and saying, okay, we are in a strong difficulty in our country, so let's try to be together in order to define a long-term policy that have all of us on board. And because we are going to share the government for different administration, and we have to be sure that we are continuing the same energy policy. And we succeeded to do that. The second point is not just having good ideas, but to put them in place. So we had to build what I call a transformative ecosystem with a completely different strategies, innovative strategies that I'm going to share some of them in a few minutes. And this means new laws, to build capacity, to have more information. I mean, everything they have to do in order to make institutional transformation. I mean, a lot of transformation in public policies in order to be sure that it was possible to make this transformation. And last but not least, not only have to have a good idea and to create the condition for things to happen, but also the governance of all the process is crucial. How to deal with different stakeholders and how to convene everybody to go in the same direction. I mean, these were the three more important pillars that allows us to do the change that we succeeded to do. And this was why in only 5 years, we made a dramatic transformation. I would say from 2010 to 2015, in 5 years, we went to a traditional hydrothermal power system with almost 50% of renewable sources to an almost completely decarbonized system, which already in 2017 has 98% of renewables in the mix. But the most interesting point is that these 98% renewables are mostly based on new sources, not just hydropower. For example, 40% of our electricity is obtained just from wind. And this number is comparable to the other wind world champion, which is Denmark. It's not easy to get 40% of wind. I'm going to share with you a little bit of how we did it. But it's not only wind. For example, biomass waste is 15 and even up to 20% of the electricity consumed in the country. It was, of course, we have zero wind 15 years ago. We have zero biomass 15 years ago. And very, very rapidly we succeeded to have that. I consider biomass, for example, Uruguay is an agro-industrial country. So we have abundant organic waste, which has a strong energy content, like, for example, rice hulls or black liquor from pulp mills or bagasse. And all of this was an environmental asset, and now it's just an energy. Environmental liability, and now it's an energy asset. But of course, in order to do all of this, in order to build this completely new system in such a short amount of time, we succeeded to have a dramatic decrease in the CO2 emissions. In fact, nowadays in Uruguay, the per capita emissions or the per kilowatt hour emissions are 30 times more than the world average. This is why people used to say that we had already done the energy transition in the power sector in Uruguay. And this is why people used to talk about this as the Uruguayan energy revolution, because we succeeded to do it in a short amount of time. And not only, I mean, moreover, another extra interest of what we succeeded to do in Uruguay is that 15 years ago, we were importing electricity from our neighbors at extraordinary prices, and now we are exporting electricity, energy surpluses, renewable energy surpluses, sorry. And for some years, we are receiving this energy exports allows us to have more than to receive more than 1% of our GDP coming just from these non-traditional exports, which are renewable energies. And so perhaps this may sound very interesting, but in fact, believe me that it was not at all easy, because what we understood is that in order to make all of this happen, we really had to innovate. We cannot just add in renewables to the grid and then expect things to happen. I mean, we have to innovate mostly in two more important points. The more important point, which is we had to develop a new planning and a new dispatch strategy in order to make these things happen. Just to begin with, the dispatch model is absolutely different than the traditional ones. Our academics worked for years in order to develop this new model, which is based in the probability of occurrence of different weather scenarios based on a century of historical data and weather forecast. And this allows us, for example, to have a prediction of the wind and solar electricity we're going to have in the grid with almost a week in advance. As you can see, I don't know if you can see the pointer here, but these two colors here, the pale one and the more dark one, it's the prediction and the real occurrence of wind electricity that we had with almost a week in advance. And from time to time, we can have 30% errors, but in general, we have less than 5 or 10% errors in the prediction of the wind amount. And for solar, it's even better. You can even have a better prediction of what is going with solar. So this allows us to have wind and solar and intermittent sources are ruling the whole system. And let me show you, for example, one week of dispatch of the country, which is the origin of the electricity that we're dispatching in the country. And this is six days. This is yellow is solar. This was not a sunny day. This base load here is biomass waste, thermal power plant running with biomass waste. In green, we have wind with, of course, extraordinary variation all over the day. And in blue, there are different hydros. There's no fossil fuel here in this week, for example. And as we can see, in some moments of the day, as those 5 that I pointed here with an arrow, in fact, as you can see, almost 100% of electricity is obtained just with biomass, with sun, and with wind. Nothing more than that. And this is because the total installed capacity of wind plus solar in the country is more or less the same as the total peak demand of the country. So if there is enough wind, enough sun, we can have the electricity just coming from these two sources alone. And in these moments, we don't use water. Water from the dams only enter into play when the wind goes down or when the sun goes down. And in this moment, for example, like this one here, yes, here we had to use a lot of hydropower, but this is because we were using the water in a completely different way as we did it before having this large amount of wind and solar. And then you can say, but perhaps this was a windy week. And in fact, this was one of those windy weeks that we can have all over the year. This is not a just windy week when, for example, for some couple of days, we have to use much more water from the dams than in other moments. And you can say, but what happened if I don't have hydropower? Well, If you don't have hydropower, or in particular, for example, in our case, if we have a week when there is neither sun, no wind, or nor water, I mean, if we have a very dry season, for example, well, in these moments, what we use is fossil fuels, but not fossil fuels from, for example, coal. I mean, there's no possibility of using coal if you have this incredibly high intermittent sources mix, because coal is not flexible. I mean, we need to have gas turbines or engines or combined cycle, of course, because a gas turbines can be turned on and off in 2-3 minutes. So you can follow the variation of wind, just put in more and or less gas in your turbines, and then you can follow the variability and intermittency of the sources. But the point is that as the amount of wind, the amount of sun, and the amount of biomass is so important in the country, now there are a few moments all over the year that we have to use such an amount of fossil fuel. So this is why fossil fuels are right now not more than 2% in an average year, and perhaps can be 5-6% in a very dry year. But in general, I mean, we can succeed to manage the variability of wind and solar intermittency of these sources using a small amount of fossil fuel. And you know what? The most interesting point is that we use no energy storage. I mean, there's not a single battery in the country. There's not water pumping in our hydropower plants. There's not a single energy storage capacity all over the country. What we show is that it's possible to manage a heavily renewable system with almost half of that intermittent sources, just because of the using the complementarity of different renewable sources in an intelligent way. I mean, we prove that the power system can work almost exclusively thanks to the complementarity of the sources, with no use at all of storage. So this happens. If you don't believe me, just take a plane, come to Uruguay, and you will see how things are working. You talk with the energy system operator, and you will see that this is possible. No matter what people say, this happens. This is not just a theoretical discussion. It's just what is going on in my country for the last 5 or 7 years. So, of course, the other question should be, and what happened with the cost? And the answer perhaps is even more radical, because in fact, costs were decreased. We have a positive impact on our energy system. In fact, the cost to produce electricity in the country went from about more than $1 billion a year to only $6 million today. And this $500 million reduction every year is 1% of GDP of our country. Make a calculation of what is 1% of the GDP in your country, and you will be the impact for the whole economy of having this incredible cost reduction. We can put this figure in a different way. What is the change of the electricity producing cost per kilowatt hour? Well, we went from a $10 producing cost to only $5 per kilowatt hour as a cost. So it was an extremely sharp reduction of the electricity production cost. But moreover, remember those extremely high cost overruns that we have in dry years? Well, they virtually disappeared, because we went from about $1 billion cost overruns in one single year to only 100 or perhaps 200 million in very dry years of cost overruns nowadays. Of course, this was not easier. We have to innovate also on that. We have to understand that the power system, that renewable sources need a business model completely different than the traditional ones. In fact, renewables need long-term contracts, and those long-term contracts in our country arise from bidding processes. And the most important is that in those bidding processes, the share of each technology is predefined using a global optimization model that tells us which is the best the best share of these sources in order to have the best complementarity between them, in order to avoid batteries or whatever that is usually said that we necessarily need in the country. So this allows us, for example, nowadays to have almost 100% of our electricity, of our consumption under contract. And this naturally leaves no room for a spot market. In fact, we have to go and we prove that the best solution in order to have renewables is to leave the marginalist market and to go to a contract market. This is crucial because renewables needs long-term contract. But the good news for that is that as we have long-term contract, I can tell you what is going to be the electricity production cost in 10 years from now. Because we have all those cost stability that we're having all over the world because of the variation of energy commodity. Well, they virtually disappear in Uruguay because we do not depend on those crazy fluctuations, because we do not depend on energy fuels, on energy commodities. And so this is why, for example, I mean, the electricity sector in Uruguay was completely insensitive to the tragic war in Europe. We haven't seen the impact on our economy, on our energy system. But moreover, the positive impact to our economy went far beyond the energy sector itself, because in order to make this transition, we got $6 billion investment. And for a small economy like Uruguay, $6 billion is 12% of the GDP of the country. So imagine the impact to our economy, new industrial capabilities, new entrepreneurial capabilities, and we created 50,000 new jobs. This may sound small for you, but for a small country with only 3 million inhabitants, this is 3% of the country's labor force. So it is a huge amount of impact, both for our economy and for the workers in general in the country. So we prove that we can have a very positive impact due to an energy transition. And last but not least, we are nowadays 99.9% of our households are having electricity with different strategies. So today, only 2,000 households lost in the middle of nowhere and the countryside in Uruguay are lacking electricity. So in fact, just to finish, what are the three main takeaways from my presentation today? The first one is that, in fact, we broke two false paradigms, two things that is continually repeated, but in fact, they are not true. First of all, yes, it is possible to manage, to make work a system with nearly 100% of renewable electricity. And even if this high renewable system is mainly based on intermittent sources, yes, we can manage systems with 50% of wind and solar in our countries. This is possible. And second false paradigm is doing an energy transition do not have a cost. You have a negative cost in the sense that we are reducing the cost of the system, because nowadays wind and solar are the cheapest options that we can have all over the world. I mean, it's cheaper. A solar kilowatt hour or a wind kilowatt hour is cheaper than a coal kilowatt hour. And this is happening almost all over the world right now. The second takeaway is that renewables that were used to be presented all over the world to fight against climate change, they're not just a solution for the global scale problem of climate change, because renewables nowadays, they had very positive impact on our economies, on our socio-economic national level, because we can create jobs, because we reduce costs, because we can have a lot of investment coming from that, because we stabilize costs, make them independently of fluctuation on energy commodities. So all this positive impact has to do with our national interest, has nothing to do with the global climate change. So fighting against climate change is just a plus. But on top of that, we have a lot of socioeconomic positive impact on our economies. And that also we prove it in our case. And last but not least, and this is my last transparency, in fact, we cannot think that just making an energy transition is just adding renewables to the grid. No, this is just the title of the book. In fact, we really have to innovate. We really have to understand that we need to do different things, both from the planning of the model, the dispatch of the model, the business model, the market model. We have to make very deep changes in order things to happen. So these are my main takeaway, and thank you so much once again for inviting me for this event.
Thank you so much, Dr. Méndez. That was absolutely fascinating. As I'm sure that you can imagine, we've got a few questions that have come in. So I'm going to do my best to get through as many as we can, and we'll go a little bit over because we've got the break next. So if you're okay to stay for a few more minutes.
Yep.
Wonderful. Sure. So first question from Pizza. Thank you very much, Pizza. How is Uruguay, progressing with battery electric vehicles? How has this decreased fossil fuel imports?
Yeah, in fact, we have done what we call the first revolution, then we are going the second revolution, which has to do with molecules. And so, yes, of course, if we have an almost 100% electricity renewable, we are trying to go deeply to electric vehicles. We have a lot of policy in this direction, but we're not subsidizing electric vehicles because, in fact, subsidies are going to electric vehicles producers, which are not in Uruguay. So we'll be subsidizing other countries' industries, and this is not our goal. So we are progressing as costs are reducing, but we are creating all the condition in order to have chargers in many places, in many cities, and all over the roads. So this is the strategy. And for sure, we will be going more rapidly than in other countries, particularly in our region, because it's on our best interest. On the same time, we're trying to go rapidly to be part of the green hydrogen production chain, and we have 3 projects right now in order to have as quick as possible. I mean, this will mean in 10 years from now or something like that. Green hydrogen in order to fuel our different vehicles.